Welcome to Harmonic Capital, where we explore the darker side of history. Today, we're going to talk about a fascinating and terrifying topic: the poisonous potatoes. From the 18th century to the present day, these deadly spuds have been causing harm and death. Let's dive in and explore the dark history of the poisonous potatoes. In the 18th century, a fungus called ergot began to infect potato crops in Europe. Ergot produced a toxic compound that caused hallucinations, convulsions, and even death. The fungus was particularly prevalent in cold and damp climates, making it a major problem for farmers. People who consumed potatoes infected with ergot fungus began to experience strange and terrifying symptoms. They reported hallucinations, convulsions, and even felt like their limbs were on fire. In severe cases, ergotism could lead to gangrene, amputations, and even death. The poisonous potatoes had a significant impact on history. The ergot fungus was blamed for the Salem witch trials, where people accused of witchcraft were actually suffering from ergotism. The fungus also played a role in the French Revolution, where food shortages and ergot-infected potatoes contributed to the unrest, and that's the story of the poisonous potatoes. From the ergot fungus to the devastating effects on human history, these deadly spuds have left a lasting impact. Number 9, we're going to talk about a fascinating and terrifying topic: the killer bees. From the depths of South America to the southern United States, these deadly insects have been wreaking havoc and claiming lives. Let's dive in and explore the dark history of the killer bees. In the 1950s, a Brazilian scientist named Warwick Estevam Kerr crossbred European honey bees with the African honey bee to create a hybrid bee that would produce more honey. However, these hybrid bees turned out to be extremely aggressive and prone to attacking in large numbers. The first reported attack by the killer bees occurred in 1957, when a swarm of bees attacked and killed a farmer in Brazil. Since then, there have been countless reports of killer bee attacks, resulting in hundreds of deaths and thousands of injuries. The killer bees are attracted to sweet smells and dark colors, and can attack in massive swarms, overwhelming their victims with sheer numbers. Their venom is no more toxic than that of regular honey bees, but the sheer quantity of venom injected during an attack can be fatal. The killer bees have spread throughout the southern United States, and have been responsible for numerous deaths and injuries. They are a major concern for beekeepers, farmers, and outdoor enthusiasts, and are considered an invasive species, and that's the story of the killer bees. From their origins in Brazil to their spread throughout the southern United States, these deadly insects have left a trail of death and destruction in their wake. Number 8, where we explore the darker side of rural legends. Today, we're going to talk about a fascinating and terrifying topic: the cow tipping legend. From the rolling hills of the countryside to the dark corners of the internet, this legend has been spreading fear and misinformation for decades. Let's dive in and explore the truth behind the cow tipping legend. The legend of cow tipping dates back to the 1970s, when it was allegedly a popular prank among rural teenagers. The idea was to sneak up on a sleeping cow and push it over, supposedly for laughs. However, this prank was not only cruel but also potentially deadly for the cow. Despite the lack of evidence, the legend of cow tipping persisted, spreading through urban legend and popular culture. It was often depicted in movies and TV shows as a hilarious and harmless prank, further perpetuating the myth. However, the reality of cow tipping is far from harmless. Cows are large and powerful animals, and pushing one over can cause serious injury or even death. Additionally, cows are not typically aggressive animals, and they are unlikely to attack unless they feel threatened or scared. In recent years, the legend of cow tipping has been largely debunked, with many experts and farmers coming forward to dismiss the myth. However, the legend persists, and it remains a popular topic of discussion among rural legend enthusiasts. And that's the story of the cow tipping legend. From its origins in rural folklore to its spread through popular culture, this legend has been a fascinating and terrifying topic for decades.
No, God! No, God, please, no! No!
Number 7. Today, we're going to talk about a shocking and disturbing topic: the pig farm horror. From the cramped and unsanitary conditions to the brutal treatment of the animals, this is a story that will leave you horrified and outraged. In 2019, an investigation into a pig farm in the United States revealed shocking animal abuse and neglect. The farm was found to have overcrowded and unsanitary conditions, with pigs living in their own filth and without access to clean water or food. The investigation also uncovered evidence of brutal treatment of the animals, including beatings and mutilations. The conditions on the farm were so bad that many of the pigs were suffering from serious health problems, including respiratory infections and skin conditions. The farm's owners were also found to have been falsifying records and lying to inspectors in order to cover up the abuse and neglect. The pig farm horror is not an isolated incident. There have been numerous reports of animal abuse and neglect on farms across the United States and around the world. The agricultural industry is a massive and powerful force, and it can be difficult for regulators and inspectors to keep up with the scale of the problem. However, there are steps that can be taken to address the issue of animal abuse and neglect on farms. Consumers can make informed choices about the food they buy, choosing to support farms and companies that prioritize animal welfare. Regulators and inspectors can work to strengthen laws and enforcement, holding farmers and farm owners accountable for their treatment of animals, and that's the story of the pig farm horror. From the shocking conditions on the farm to the broader issues of animal abuse and neglect in the agricultural industry, this is a story that will leave you horrified and outraged. Number 6. Today, we're going to talk about a shocking and disturbing topic: the radium girls. From the glowing watch faces to the devastating health effects, this is a story that will leave you horrified and outraged. In the early 20th century, hundreds of women were employed to paint watch faces with glow-in-the-dark paint containing radium. The women, mostly teenagers and young adults, were told that the paint was harmless and that they could even use their tongues to shape the fine tips of their brushes. However, the women soon began to experience strange and terrifying symptoms. Their jaws would ache and swell, their teeth would fall out, and they would suffer from crippling bone cancer. The women were also experiencing miscarriages, stillbirths, and birth defects. The radium girls were not just victims of circumstance, they were also victims of corporate greed and negligence. The companies that employed the women knew about the dangers of radium but chose to ignore them in order to save money and increase profits. The radium girls fought back against their employers, demanding justice and compensation for their suffering. However, their fight was not easy. They faced opposition from the companies, the government, and even their own families. Despite the odds against them, the radium girls persevered. They organized protests, rallies, and lawsuits, and eventually, they won. The companies were forced to pay compensation to the women, and new laws were passed to protect workers from hazardous materials. The story of the radium girls is a powerful reminder of the importance of workers' rights and corporate accountability. It's also a testament to the strength and resilience of women who fought against incredible odds to demand justice and fairness, and that's the story of the radium girls. From the glowing watch faces to the devastating health effects, this is a story that will leave you horrified and outraged. Number 5. Today, we're going to talk about a shocking and devastating disaster: the Great Molasses Flood. On January 15, 1919, a storage tank containing over 2.3 million gallons of molasses burst in Boston's North End, sending a giant wave of molasses through the streets at an estimated 35 miles per hour. The disaster killed 21 people and injured 150 others. The cleanup efforts took months, and the harbor was brown with molasses for weeks. The Great Molasses Flood was one of the most bizarre and tragic disasters in American history. The disaster occurred on a typical winter day in Boston. The storage tank, which was owned by the Purity Distilling Company, had been filled to capacity with molasses. At around 12:30 p.m., the tank suddenly burst, sending a massive wave of molasses crashing through the streets. The wave was so powerful that it knocked over buildings, swept away horses and carts, and even damaged the girders of the nearby railroad tracks. The aftermath of the disaster was chaotic and devastating. Rescue workers struggled to reach trapped survivors, and medical teams worked tirelessly to treat the injured. The cleanup efforts took months, with workers using salt water from the harbor to try and dissolve the molasses. The Great Molasses Flood was a traumatic event in American history, and it had a profound impact on the country's approach to industrial safety. It also led to changes in the way that hazardous materials are stored and transported. And that's the story of the Great Molasses Flood. Number 4. Today, we're going to talk about a fascinating and terrifying topic: the mad cow disease. In the 1980s, a mysterious illness began to affect cattle in the United Kingdom. The disease, which became known as BSE or mad cow disease, caused cows to become aggressive, stumble, and eventually die. The disease was later found to be caused by a misfolded protein called a prion, which was transmitted through contaminated animal feed. The outbreak of mad cow disease led to a massive cull of cattle, widespread panic, and a significant impact on the global food industry. The first reported cases of mad cow disease occurred in 1986, on a farm in Sussex, England. At first, the disease was thought to be a rare and isolated incident. But as more cases began to appear, it became clear that something much more sinister was at play. The disease spread rapidly, and by the early 1990s, it had become a major crisis for the UK's agricultural industry. As the outbreak worsened, the UK government was forced to take drastic action. A massive cull of cattle was undertaken, with over 180,000 animals being slaughtered in an effort to contain the disease. The cull was highly controversial, with many farmers and animal welfare groups opposing the measure. Despite the efforts to contain it, mad cow disease continued to spread, and it eventually jumped species, infecting humans and causing a deadly brain disease called variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. The human toll of the outbreak was devastating, with over 200 people dying from the disease. The mad cow disease outbreak was a major wake-up call for the global food industry, highlighting the need for stricter safety controls and more rigorous testing of animal feed. It also raised important questions about the ethics of industrial agriculture and the risks of playing with nature, and that's the story of the mad cow disease. Number 3. Today, we're going to talk about a fascinating and terrifying topic: the avian flu pandemic. In 2004, a deadly strain of bird flu began to spread across Asia, killing millions of birds and hundreds of people. The virus, which became known as H5N1, was highly contagious and had a mortality rate of over 50%. The outbreak led to widespread panic, massive culls of birds, and significant economic losses. The avian flu pandemic was a stark reminder of the dangers of infectious diseases and the importance of global cooperation in preventing and responding to outbreaks. The first reported cases of avian flu occurred in 2003, in the southern province of Guangdong, China. At first, the disease was thought to be a rare and isolated incident, but as more cases began to appear, it became clear that something much more sinister was at play. The disease spread rapidly, and by 2004, it had spread to over 10 countries in Asia. As the outbreak worsened, the global health community sprang into action. The World Health Organization, WHO, declared the outbreak a global health emergency, and teams of experts were dispatched to affected countries to help contain the spread of the disease. Despite the efforts to contain it, the avian flu pandemic continued to spread, and it eventually jumped species, infecting humans and causing a deadly respiratory illness. The human toll of the outbreak was devastating. With over 400 people dying from the disease, the avian flu pandemic was a major wake-up call for the global health community, highlighting the need for better preparedness and response to infectious disease outbreaks. It also raised important questions about the ethics of animal agriculture and the risks of zoonotic diseases, and that's the story of the avian flu pandemic. Number 2. Today, we're going to talk about a shocking and devastating disaster, the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. On April 26, 1986, a catastrophic explosion occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine, releasing radioactive materials into the environment and contaminating millions of acres of land. The disaster killed 28 people immediately and thousands more in the years that followed. The Chernobyl disaster was the worst nuclear power plant accident in history, and it had a profound impact on the world's perception of nuclear power. The disaster occurred during a safety test on one of the plant's reactors. The test aimed to determine how long the turbines would keep spinning and generating electricity in the event of a loss of power to the main cooling pumps. However, the test was poorly designed and inadequately supervised, and it resulted in an uncontrolled power surge that caused the reactor to explode. The explosion was so powerful that it blew off the reactor's heavy steel and concrete lid, releasing a massive amount of radioactive material into the environment. The radioactive plume spread over a wide area, contaminating millions of acres of land and affecting millions of people. The aftermath of the disaster was chaotic and devastating. Rescue workers struggled to reach the damaged reactor, and medical teams worked tirelessly to treat the injured. The nearby city of Pripyat was evacuated, and it remains abandoned to this day. The Chernobyl disaster was a major wake-up call for the nuclear industry, highlighting the need for stricter safety controls and more rigorous testing of nuclear reactors. It also raised important questions about the ethics of nuclear power and the risks of playing with nature, and that's the story of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. And lastly, the worst of the worst. Today, we're going to talk about a devastating and tragic event, the Irish potato famine. In the 1840s, a disease called potato blight began to affect potato crops in Ireland, leading to widespread crop failure and famine. The famine killed an estimated 1 million people and led to the emigration of millions more. The Irish potato famine was a traumatic event in Irish history and had a profound impact on the country's politics, culture, and identity. The Irish potato famine was not just a natural disaster, but also a result of human actions. The Irish population had become heavily dependent on potatoes as a food source, and the lack of genetic diversity in the potato crop made it vulnerable to disease. When the potato blight struck, the Irish people were left without a reliable source of food. The British government, which ruled Ireland at the time, responded slowly and inadequately to the crisis. They believed that the market would correct itself and that the famine was a result of the Irish people's own laziness and lack of initiative. This attitude only exacerbated the suffering of the Irish people. The famine had a profound impact on Irish society and culture. It led to widespread poverty, disease, and death, and it also led to a significant shift in the country's demographics. Many Irish people emigrated to other countries, including the United States, in search of a better life. The Irish potato famine is also remembered as a symbol of British colonialism and oppression. The British government's response to the crisis was seen as inadequate and even cruel, and it contributed to the growing sense of Irish nationalism and resentment towards British rule, and that's the story of the Irish potato famine. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more shocking and thought-provoking content.